Good morning, Shelley. Good morning, Owen. Good morning, Adam. Good morning, Julian. Good morning, Tara.
Good morning, Tara.
Good morning, Dickon.
There are 25 Rudolf Steiner Waldorf schools in Britain and over 500 worldwide. They're co-educational, non-selective, and take children from kindergarten through to 18 or 19. Unlike most of the Waldorf schools in Europe, the schools in Britain are not supported by the state and therefore have to be financially dependent on parents.
This particular experiment is capable of enormous precision, and I think your instructions say somewhere that you worry about accuracy. Okay, now you have just, by starting the experiment and thinking about it, you have quite rightly come to a conclusion. You've got a problem. Yep. You need to do something about it, making it more accurate, and I've given you a hint what to do about it. You see? Yep. Now, you think about that. Absolutely, this is exactly the right
closer
process.
to the...
Steiner schools have their own curriculum, but bridges of various sorts are made to state examinations. Timing, what is taught when, is the all-important consideration.
Well, you think about it. I'm just telling you, you've got an excellent problem here that you're worrying about, and you're quite right.
Wir sind die Musikanten und kommen aus Schwabenland. Ich kann ja spielen auf der Flöte.
The first Rudolf Steiner Waldorf School was opened in Stuttgart in 1919. This is King's Langley in Hertfordshire. An enlightened industrialist who was interested in the work of the Austrian educator and philosopher Rudolf Steiner and his insights into the spiritual background to human evolution, wanted a school for the children of his factory workers that would help them to meet the challenges of the 20th century. Steiner developed the fundamentals of the curriculum and worked closely with the pioneer teachers. Michael Hall at Forest Row in Sussex was the first Rudolf Steiner Waldorf School in Britain, founded in 1925. It now has over 500 children, 80 of whom are boarders and 75 in the kindergarten. In Steiner schools, there is no formal learning, no reading, writing or arithmetic until the children are 6 or 7. The emphasis is on creative play, imagination and rhythm.
Lucky bag. You can put it on your hand.
No! No!
There's a fire in my house! No, you don't climb up here. This is our fire escape. It's a fire escape. This is ours. I don't have a fire escape, though. Yes, but you can't just shoot out of your house and climb up here. This doesn't save you from fire.
Sally Langer, along with a helper, has a group of 18 children, aged between 4 and 6.
Rhythm is, of course, one of the key words in our education.
It's so good for the children to have a rhythmical element to the whole of their day, to the whole of their life. It works into everything. So each day has its particular rhythm, each week, each month, each season.
Yes, it's a shop.
Different teachers do it in different ways. But in my class, they come in and they play every day. And within that playtime, then there's a special activity. On Monday, it's painting, and so on through the week until we end up with baking on the Friday. And I also don't speak to the children about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It's painting day, and so on, because that means something to them. Whereas Monday, Tuesday are abstract things. But the play comes every day, and they know that, and it makes them feel secure. They just walk in the door in the morning, and they can begin whatever they want to do. And then there's always a big clear up, and some days that takes a long time, but there's a rhythm to that as well.
We don't need to have all this clutter. I know I'm trying to clear up.
La 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 la. And the next part of the rhythm of the morning is ring time, when we have all the traditional folk songs, ring games, little poems, and so on. Oats and beans and barley grows, oats and beans and barley grows. And there again I do exactly the same ones every day over about a month. First the farmer sows his seeds, then he stands and takes his seeds, stamps his feet and claps his hands, and turns around to view the lands. Looking for a partner, looking for a partner. Open the ring and take one in and dance around together. In the kindergarten, in a Waldorf school, there are certain key things that one thinks about. One of them is the rhythm, one of them is the repetition, and another key thing is the reverence, because we wish to help the children to grow up to respect the world around them. And so we try to bring in a lot of reverence to what we do, whether it's just folding our hands before we say a grace and being very still for a moment. That's all a part of this. And what I'm striving to do here is not to be a teacher of the children, but to be a kind of godmother, a second mother, and do much as I would at home. You know, we wash up and we clean the floor and we polish the tables and we do all those sort of things that a mother does. And for that reason, I also don't very often play with the children, because a mother at home is busy and she will have the children playing around her usually.
I asked Sally if she thought that in fact it would be better if children stayed at home until they were 6 or 7, as was the tradition and in parts of Europe still is.
You see, nowadays, a lot of children can't be at home for one reason or another. Either they're single parents very often, mother has to go out to work, or sometimes the mothers wish to go out and work. And so I feel very open to receiving quite young children, if necessary. Sometimes too, mothers haven't got the strength that they used to have. And sometimes they also don't quite know where to find help. In the old days there was the extended family. But often parents are very much on their own now. And so we're seeking to help in that realm.
Oliver, we're going to need to rake all this earth back as well, you know.
Parents of children at Steiner schools are strongly encouraged to think carefully about the extent to which young children in particular are exposed to television.
Now you can put all the rest of the compost in.
Children see more and more television nowadays,
Down this side you can rake better.
and it is a very powerful medium. It has a kind of attraction which makes it difficult to withstand. But it is becoming more and more recognised all over the Western world that television does have damaging effects as well. And the main thing for me is the lack of human contact. A young child needs human contact, such as in the telling of stories. And that's just not there with the television. If a child comes for an interview, I feel I can tell whether that's a television watcher or not. It comes out most strongly in the way they play. The concentration is not so good. It can also come out in violence. Of course, it's not just television. I mean, children who have to travel a lot. Noise is one of the major difficulties of our time.
Let me sit by you at table.
The rhythm of Sally's morning ends with a story.
From your little cup. And let me sleep in your bed. Then I will bring you back your golden ball. Oh, yes, said the princess, anything, if only you will bring me back my favourite plaything. For she thought, you know, that the frog would soon forget what he had asked.
I tell the same story for a week.
Same story every day.
Every day, yes. It builds up tremendous strength within the children to have the same. You know how children love to hear the same thing again and again?
The princess joyfully picked it up and ran away with it.
And why do you tell it as opposed to read it?
You know, if you have a book and you've got words there, you're looking at the book quite a bit of the time, even if you know it well. So you're sort of connected to what's written. But if you tell it, I think there are two things to it. The first is that you have a very close connection with the children. There's a real human contact with them. And also, if you've had to work at learning that story by heart, and it is a lot of work, you really deepen it in yourself. And of course, these fairy tales, we tell quite a lot of fairy tales, have very deep meanings. And you can work on that when you learn them by heart.
Once upon a time, in 1983, a group of parents and teachers founded the Hereford Waldorf School. Their concern was an increasingly familiar one, a concern already expressed to me by Sally, the kindergarten teacher at Michael Hall.
Each year of a child's life is very precious. And we want to fill it, or let the children fill it, with what we feel is appropriate to that time of their life, and not be pressurized by what the world is demanding too early.
The Hereford School is one of about 20 younger Steiner schools in Britain. Its home is a redundant village school, and recently they've expanded into a neighbouring barn. The Hereford Waldorf School now has over 150 children from ages 4 to 16. And rather than charging fees, there's a contribution system, parents paying what they can afford. It's a struggle, but seems to be a happy and united one.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N.
In Class 1, with the 6- and 7-year-olds, school as such begins. But it begins very gently.
Y, Z.
Good, move on. It's the first step into formal learning from the sort of play years of the kindergarten. But to a large extent, you retain a lot of the play and physical activity as a basis for what you're teaching in number work and reading and writing.
Let your big bag fall off. Going to the right. And
Merrily, merrily marches the minstrel all mountain and meadow down to the sea, merrily making his magical music.
It was Rudolf Steiner, in the early years of the 20th century, who stressed the importance for the young child of a healthy and harmonious relationship with their physical body before too many demands are made on their intellectual capacities.
Merrily making his magical music, magical melodies, marvellous to me. I think there's a lot of compensation that we have to do in our classrooms to compensate for, say, the lack of perhaps traditional children's games and traditional forms of physical activity, perhaps, that made it easier for young, this is talking about young children, of course, to get into their bodies. I mean, just sort of following mother around the house and doing household tasks, you know, polishing or cleaning or sweeping, all those tasks, you know, so sort of mechanised now. And children's ring games aren't really, you know, don't have the prominence they once had. And all those activities were very important, I think, in actually helping a child to integrate into its body.
Glory be, every field, every tree comes to life.
David Donaldson will stay with this class for 8 years, taking the children through the Waldorf curriculum for the first part of each morning. They call it the main lesson.
Greet the spring, hey ding-a-ding-ding.
I taught in a senior high comprehensive for a few years as an English teacher.
And what attracted you to this sort of education?
Oh, it's a long story. I mean, really, the curriculum, in a word, the content of the curriculum, the very sort of thorough and satisfying and comprehensive view of child development that it gives, taking, you know, the different stages and also stages within stages, gives you such a lot of markers for your own observation, but also the content of the curriculum speaks to you as well as the children, you know, to the teacher as well as the children. It's very sort of rich in that respect.
And you'll stay with this class now for 8 years, won't you?
Yes, that's right, yeah. Well, that's the hope, yes, so that you see them right through the middle school years from 7, 6, 7, right up to 14.
That's quite a challenge for you, the range.
Well, exactly, yes, that's right. I mean, that's one of the... It is a challenge. It's also one of the attractions, you know, that you can never get stale.
Sam, put yourself in quiet. Ready. 10 fat sausages sizzling in the pan. 1 went pop and 2 went bang.
5.
You're moving all the time. And what's so satisfying about that, I think, is that you're following a sort of evolution of consciousness, of human consciousness. And I find that fascinating, that actually being able to have the opportunity to follow that and to develop that with children, and there's an awful lot in it for the teacher as well as the children.
So you mean that the children are recapitulating, in a sense, in their development, the evolution of man?
That's the idea behind the curriculum. That's right. I mean, in the class that I've got, it's the dream time. Yes, the age of the fairy story.
1, 2, 3, shoot.
So that the teaching takes place through the medium of fairy stories and legends.
7, 8 them straight. 9, 10, big fat hen. 11, 12, dig and delve. 13, 14, maids are...
What about reading and writing? I mean, they start to learn that now with you.
That's right, yeah. Yes, and you
lead them into that quite gently then.
Well, you lead them into it through story. Well, through all the arts, really, through story and movement and music and song and colour, of course, and drawing.
I mean, why can't you just simply teach them the alphabet and teach them to add and subtract?
Well, because it's felt that is the state of soul in which the child lives, really, the world of movement and music, of song, rather than the sort of abstract world of intellect and concept, and that... The thought is that you should bring intellectual, sort of abstract intellectual learning, which after all is what number and the letters are, in a very pictorial way, so that it can really sink into the child, go right into their being, and also into their limbs. So you try to do as much movement as possible. They learn with their bodies and with their feelings. Eyes closed. Well, found her. Who else can spell Rapunzel? Go on then, Neil, that's a try. Hey, yes, go on, try. Ready? Eyes closed. Ready? Go. So you try to make things fun, to bring contrasts. I think that's very important. Light and shade, fast and slow, happy and sad. Those strong contrasts so that the feeling life of the child is really nourished. And so long as that's happening, then there should be no trouble with school. You know, they should kind of be fed by it. And that's my feeling about what I'm trying to do. It's a kind of nourishment of the soul, I suppose.
By the end of Class 1, the children will be able to write many more words than Rapunzel. But, according to the theory, they will have learnt these skills through capacities that come naturally to their age. However, in Steiner schools, because they are non-selective, there are children of every sort of ability. Some, for example, learn to read much earlier than others. Some will take their A-levels and go on to university. Almost all will go on into some form of further education. But classes are unstreamed over the 12 years of school. The teacher of Class 2 is Robert Bolsius from Holland.
So 10 times 10, you said rightly, is 100. So we put it in the hundreds place, is 100. Good.
And then you put the one at the bottom.
Oh, I see. Yes. Right. Good. Yeah. Yeah. Good. And now find out. Good. You have finished? Right. I think you can help. You help Sophie a bit. Go to Sophie and help Sophie a bit. So Mina is going to help you. Start with the next sum. Is 13 and 13. Okay?
As well as learning to do sums, the children in Class 2, 7 to 8-year-olds, are now well into reading.
We approach the reading in such a way that the children start to write first. And we develop the writing out of the pictures. And every letter, actually, in our alphabet originally came out of picture writing. So what the children do in Classes 1, they, for instance, the K is the king's letter. So out of the picture of the king, the K comes about. As soon as they have those concepts, then they start to write the letters of the alphabet and copy songs and poems they know very well from the blackboard. And the next lesson in Class 1, still all this, is that they start to read their own writing. In Class 2, we go a little bit further, then they learn the joined-up writing, and they read from printed books. So in fact, in our schools, we don't teach formal reading. The children learn reading themselves out of the writing. Some children need extra help with that, which is fair enough. Sometimes children help, and sometimes teachers help.
And you don't use textbooks. I mean, that picture on the blackboard, for example, I mean, you've done that picture, haven't you?
Yes.
This picture here.
Yes.
That's deliberate too, as opposed to using textbooks or...
Yes, well, the function of this picture in this class, every teacher is free to do whatever he or she likes with blackboard drawings. But what we do here is that I draw every day something new, a flower, a mouse, a butterfly, or some more. And then, because the training of the senses, we are thinking, is very important, they learn by watching carefully what the teacher has done overnight. And the next day, they discover what has happened. And sometimes they are very good, because most of the time they're very good, but I draw a tiny little thing, a little butterfly or a mouse paw has changed, and they discover that. The background of all this is the training of the senses, that they really learn to look at things.
Now, windmill, it is turning, tra-la-la.
During the second part of the morning, the classes are often taught by someone other than their class teacher. Class 1 is here rehearsing a little play with Greta Rushbrook, one of the founder teachers of the Hereford Waldorf School.
The kind winds
17, 18.
Meanwhile, Class 4 are enjoying the spring sunshine and a very relaxed form of athletics. Competition, both inside and outside the classroom, is not emphasised in Steiner schools.
15, 16, 17, 18, go. Oh dear, Luke. Do you want to start again?
My shoe came off.
I think we're going to do some high jump.
Oh, I hate high jump.
The idea of this was for everybody to find their own time and then to see how they improve on their time, or otherwise. Yeah. No, we weren't doing it as a race.
In the school, you don't have this competition between children very much, do you? I mean,
there are some competitive games that are played, but I mean, but not as it's not as a principle to make a lot of competitive sports. Certainly not. No. I mean, it's really to find, everybody's potential, what everyone can do, and for them to measure themselves against themselves, really, rather than against each other, which is easier said than done. On occasions, because people will compare themselves, obviously.
Classrooms, you don't have marks, do you?
No sort of class positions or anything like that, no. I mean, there's a report, one yearly report at the end of the year.
She was 14 and a half, now it's 15.
But otherwise, there's parents' evenings every term, and so the relationship, hopefully, between teacher and parent is sufficiently close to, for parents to be aware of what their children are achieving or not, and for it to be approached in that way.
You don't think children achieve more if they compete with each other, then?
Well, I mean, it depends whether you're wanting to focus on that kind of achievement, I think, really. I mean, in athletics, obviously one would probably get better results with a competitive spirit. I mean, really here, what I'm doing is running. is the joy of running and exercise, and I mean, I'm not really. I mean, I've introduced the element of timing just to give them a reflection of how long it takes them, but not really so that they can then go and compare. It'd be interesting to see if they do. I mean, I don't know whether they will go and say, well, I'm faster than you, or we'll have to wait and see.
No one is trying to race anyone else here. These 8- and 9-year-olds in Class 3 are just having a good, quiet read. The relationship between animals and the human being is the subject of the current main lesson for these 9- and 10-year-olds in Class 4. What can the animals teach us about ourselves? Have you ever seen a badger?
It's a skunk.
Oh, it's a skunk.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was a badger.
Turning wild land into fertile places, digging rocks out of mountains.
These children will work for the first part of each morning on this particular subject for 3 or 4 weeks with their class teacher. In this Waldorf school, they call her by her first name, Peggy. In addition to the animals presented by the teacher, each child has chosen a particular animal for their individual projects. What animal are you doing?
I'm for my project, I'm doing birds of prey.
Birds of prey, yes. Writing, composition and art all are interwoven into most of the main lessons. And the children create their own textbooks as they work through the 12-year Waldorf curriculum.
Fungi protects the algae, so the algae can grow in areas where it couldn't grow by itself.
Trevor Reed was, among other things, a gardener before he trained as a Waldorf teacher. He taught for 2 years at a Steiner school in Yorkshire before coming to Hereford.
To the fungi. So the fungi, therefore, because it can't take the sun's light and turn it into its own matter, it takes it from other living material or material that's just dying. In 5 minutes' time or so, you're going to start writing that. But before then, can we look at the algae?
So you've done this lesson for how many weeks then?
This is our third week of this main lesson.
Yes.
And we've taken a general look at the flowering plant as the archetype of the plant, and from there we'll now look at the plants, the individual plants, such as the fungi, the mosses, the horsetails. We'll go on from there.
And earlier in the year with this class, what have you done in your main lessons?
At the start of the year, we did British geography. We looked at Scotland, England, Wales and Ireland. We looked at its geological nature. We looked at how people earn a living. In maths, we looked at decimals, yes, decimal fractions, following on from last year's look at ordinary fractions. And then we've also had a long spell on mythology. Yes, we were looking at first the Egyptian era in history, and we looked at the great myths of Egypt, from which we've taken our play Isis and Osiris. And what does it tell of? Hannah?
Well, it's like when Isis and Osiris ruled over Egypt, and their brother Set was very jealous of Osiris, because he was ruling and he wanted to rule the land. So Set plotted a plan to kill Osiris, and then Isis had to go off and search for his body.
Thank you, Hannah. It's an interesting time in history, and an interesting time for the children. I generally find that Egypt, of all times, is the time of the greatest excitement.
And you feel that the 11-year-olds have an affinity with this particular period of history, then?
I think the best thing is to ask them.
Is that right?
Yes. Which of your mythologies have you found most interesting? The ones that you've really been close to, if you like? Egypt.
At present, the children can only stay at the Hereford Waldorf School until they're 16. Many will then go on to a sixth form college for the bulk of their exam work. But the school is continuing to expand. This will soon be a laboratory space. The plasterers are boys on work experience from a German Waldorf school, of which there are over 140.
In Germany, the schools are much larger, there are more of them, and they get state funding, which is different from here. I think they get about 2/3 state funding, their running costs and their building costs, whereas here we've got to do it all on our own, by charging people to come here and by collecting money and fundraising and working very, very hard.
Parents at the Hereford Waldorf School are not charged fees, but work with a contribution system based on a percentage of their income. It's a part solution to the general problem of underfunding. The Waldorf schools don't wish to be seen as elitist, a problem that doesn't exist for the state-funded schools in Germany, Holland and in Scandinavia. So there is a policy of not refusing any child on financial grounds alone, a policy that can create problems for the school budget and keeps everyone on their toes. So what is it that attracts parents to such schools?
I suppose it's partly because I've experienced the education, because I went through a similar school to this when I was a child, and my father also taught at a school like this, so I've been thoroughly imbibed in the traditions of the school. But I think much more because this school, I think, in the earlier years really addresses the whole needs of the child. It enlivens the interest of the child in the world in a way that a school really feeding them with facts and trying to teach them the tricks of passing exams doesn't. So I think it's meeting the real needs of the child out of an understanding of the evolution of our society and giving them a real sense of wonder.
And you're not bothered that they're not particularly pushed academically, for example? I mean, you're worried about standards and not reading and writing very early and this sort of thing.
I know from experience that learning to read and write a bit later isn't a disadvantage. I didn't learn to read and write until quite late, and I've managed to become a professor at a university, and that hasn't stopped me. I think anything one does has to be done really well. So I am worried about standards here as I would be worried in the university about standards. But the standards here are not just measured in how many facts they can recount. It's measured for me in the in the ability of children to carry on learning outside the school and beyond the school education, the real interest in the world that I think you find in the children here. And I'm quite convinced, too, that academically bright children who want to go on to an academic career can do so without any disadvantage. In fact, I think they have significant advantages from having not been forced in that mould in a very early part of their life.
Yes! Oh, good. Wow! Mark, I got one!
The teachers treat the child as a whole being, you know, their spiritual side, their physical side, their emotional side, and their academic side. So.
And you don't find this so much in the system you work in, then?
Well, I actually teach children that are expelled from school, so I have a slightly different aspect than the children I teach. But you see, I wouldn't put down state school teachers. I think they would do it if they could, but the system as it is doesn't give you the time. You know, I've had to fight to give time to children, you know, because all that's really concerned is their marks.
Slowly, 1, 2, 3.
I myself went through a real sort of academic hothouse education with no end of O-levels and A-levels far too early and then on to university. And I really have not wanted my own children to have that kind of education, even though it's often seen as being the successful, privileged kind of education. But I think this is the real privileged education because the children have so much more respect. So much less is foisted on them. And there's plenty of time for university. They'll still go to university if they want and so on. It's not necessary to go through this hothouse in the first place. In fact, quite the opposite.
Because everything is moving in the opposite way, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, it is. But Gary Snyder, an American poet I'm very fond of, and a scholar, I mean, he's a very scholarly man, he said that one probably needs as many years to unlearn one's education as one has spent actually having it. And I think that's probably not true of this kind of school. I think it is true of many regular schools.
Okay, I think the other thing about this school that brought us here is that it has this enormous pioneering energy. I mean, we built this school with our physical bare hands and raised the money to do it, despite the odds. And this is a school that one can have an enormous contribution, make an enormous contribution to, and the children can see you making that contribution. So they can by your demonstration of what you do, you can demonstrate the values that you have very clearly to them. They can see it very clearly. And the second thing is that this school is unique as a social institution in that it brings together people from the most diverse backgrounds to really work together as parents, working very actively with the teachers. It isn't something where we deliver our kids early in the morning and pick them up at night and they've been spoon-fed. We live this school, and the children see that we live this school, and that rubs off on the children.
Perhaps it's too high, Anya. No, the index is bigger. Yeah.
In the centre of Aberdeen, and also in York, Bristol, Edinburgh, Brighton and London, there's a Waldorf City School.
Here we go. And now your feet as well.
Movement, as well as colour and music, has an important role to play in Waldorf education. Like other aspects of the curriculum, it has been carefully thought through. They call it eurythmy.
You're working with the child's soul and allowing it to express itself not through words but through movement. And that's quite special. That's why the children like it so much. When they get older, then they learn how to much more complicated forms and geometric patterns and things. But when they're little, it's really just moving together in space. But again, this feeling for movement starts.
And time
And of course, this was a time of tremendous unrest in Britain. People often refer to what's called the good old days, and they say, you know, that the time before the First World War, that was the good old days. But of course, there was a lot of very nasty strikes at this time, very, very serious industrial problems.
The Aberdeen Waldorf School was founded in 1977. Bill Milne has taught there for 8 years.
When I graduated myself, I went into the state system, and I was happy there for about 17 years. But I came to a stage in my life when I was 42, I think. I felt I just wanted something different. And I saw in the state system many dedicated teachers who were interested in their subject and interested in their pupils and trying to help them. But yet I felt the system, it wasn't so bad when I joined the state system in the 1960s, but I felt more and more it was becoming our system, and you had to go along with it. You had to teach in a certain way. And assessment was taking over. And the methodology was the children working at worksheets and doing research. And I felt it was becoming, instead of being a teacher, you're becoming more a classroom manager.
I asked Bill what effect he thought this trend in the state system of education was having on children.
Well, I don't know. To my mind, it was affecting the teaching. It was really making the teaching very uninteresting. For example, instead of maybe talking about the Norman Conquest and what its consequences were, you had to devise questions which were absolutely objective. And the only way you can do that is by asking, I'm talking about history, my own subject, of course. The only way you can do that is by asking purely factual questions. What date did it happen? What was the name of the king who came over from Normandy, and so on.
Pomegranates, pure and piquant, pomegranates. Fresh goat's cheese, sure to please. Fresh goat's cheese, come.
The name of the main character in this historical play is Pythagoras. These 9- and 10-year-olds in Class 5 have been studying Greek mythology and history in their main lesson. Acting it out, the teacher feels, is just one way of helping to bring the subject alive. This year, the children have also made their first steps in geometry and have experienced the geometric forms spatially in their eurythmy lessons.
Are these pomegranates fresh from Hellas, boy? They're as Greek as I am, sir. Persephone yourself never tasted fresher.
Better to say they're as fresh as you for speaking so freshly of a goddess.
Jetzt, Schätzchen, jetzt sind wir allein. Wir können betraulich nun plaudern.
Es wird ja nicht Wichtiges sein. Ich darf bei der Arbeit nicht zaudern.
Ein Wörtchen, du trotzige du.
In Waldorf schools, children learn foreign languages from Class 1. But as with their own language, they learn to speak first. The study of grammar and composition come later.
So habe ich nimmer mehr Ruhe. So rede nur zu.
Ein Weilchen, höre mir zu.
The Aberdeen Waldorf School faces many of the same problems as the Hereford Waldorf School. Underfunding, parents who want this sort of education for their children, but who often are not well off, and some who feel very uncomfortable at having to be part of a private educational system.
We had started, our first child went to the local school because we actually thought it would be good for her to go to the local school and have all her friends. But we discovered really after she'd been there a second term that really there was something missing.
I think the thing was that we were quite concerned that the local school were putting a lot of pressure on the children from very early on.
Yes.
I mean, from the very first day a reading book was handed out, and we felt that the sort of emotional side of the child was just completely ignored. Whereas what impresses about the Waldorf school is that they were very child-centred and tried to relate the teaching to distinct stages in the child's development.
Yes.
Whereas with the local school, it seemed to be quite mechanistic and no relation to what stage the child was at. With the Waldorf school, it was a case of working with the children at their pace, working with them and allowing their natural development. And if that meant that you started reading later and it was going to take them longer till they read, then that was all right, because what you're going to gain out of that was a huge increase in their imagination, and you keep their joy of being at school.
Maypole dancing we do at this particular time of year
is just one of the markers to establish the rhythm of the year. We do a lot of movement because that helps the finer movements in the classroom in writing. And it is also a kind of geometry that they are experiencing with their whole body, and only later on, when they do geometry, do they understand these progressions.
I think one of the things as well that we found was really good is that the school year really goes with the seasons. Now that is not the same in what I would call mainstream education, because we've even altered it locally so that it fits in with exams, so Easter isn't Easter anymore. It's spring holiday, not the Easter holidays. But the children have a sense of where they are in the school year because of the festivals, because of the seasons changing, autumn into winter. They're going with that, and I feel that that gives them something that, you know, they're not going to get elsewhere because of the way that we're living now.
Yes.
It's quite a sacrifice for you, isn't it? I mean, because these schools have to charge fees. Yes. They're not supported by the state as they are on the continent. Yes. But you've obviously been prepared to...
That actually was quite hard because we don't believe in fee-paying schools. And we really had to think about it. And one of the things I've always felt quite sad is that Waldorf education is not part of the mainstream education, that we actually have to go and pay for that as a separate thing. Whereas I feel that, you know, it should be part of that all parents get the opportunity to put their children there, that they truly have a choice.
Like that. Gilly would take his big bow.
My feeling is the difference between the private schools and the state schools here is not very much. The difference is that you pay in one and you don't pay in the other. But the system is very largely the same. Yes. Whereas with the Waldorf education, there is a vast difference between the approach to the child, the method of education, the whole style of the education. It really is an alternative, a different way of educating the children. It's a pity, if you're speaking about parental choice, that you can't have that choice under the state system. Why shouldn't we have that choice?
They do in Europe. Yeah. They do in Europe. It is part of mainstream education over there, where parents really do have a choice, and it is quite sad that we don't, so far.
Du bist ganz schmal, ja, und gefesselt, ja, und müde. Also im Stimme kommt es raus.
With Britain drawing ever closer to Europe, there are increasing pressures on the British government also to recognise Waldorf education as a viable and alternative system with an internationally recognised curriculum. This education should, many believe, be accessible to everyone who wants it.
Da ist er.
Scheint ganz ohne Bewegung.
Nein, schläft.
Es ist unmöglich, seine Suche
unmöglich. Must get this word clear, okay? Unmöglich, impossible, unmöglich. Es ist unmöglich.
Es ist unmöglich.
I've been a class teacher for a long time and a eurythmy teacher too, so the eurythmy should enhance the rest of the lessons. And it gives just another dimension to the stories, and later on to the science and to the geography and all kinds of things. You can really work it into everything. All the geometric forms you do really help the child to get this imagination and put it out into space. And you must link yourself to the age of the child. It's the right thing at the right time.
A mile or so off the M25 in Hertfordshire is the King's Langley Rudolf Steiner School. Founded in 1941, it is, along with Michael Hall in Sussex, one of 5 schools in Britain offering the full 12-year Waldorf curriculum, including facilities for GCSE and A-level work. There are over 400 children aged between 4 and 19 attending the King's Langley School, many of whom travel out daily from London.
A nice entry flutes, but then you got a little bit tardy.
The school orchestra draws on children from around the age of 11 upwards, plus 1 or 2 parents and members of staff. Beethoven's Hymn to Joy, Class 1's Joy to Paint. But what's called wet on wet is not really painting pictures.
Painting wet on wet is really about painting colour and not form. They take usually 2 colours and they paint those colours so they mix together and play together and work together. You instigate it by telling a story. And a feeling story. You want them to paint out of their feelings, that they want to feel what blue is. The first time they painted blue, it was so silent. They just painted blue on the page and they were the quietest I'd ever heard them. It's amazing how it's quite difficult for adults, I think, to paint like that. But children catch on immediately. They don't think of pictures. Painting wet on wet, of course, you've got a wet sheet right from the beginning, all wet. So it's very easy to let one run into the other and not to bring them up And sometimes some children find it very difficult to cross that line. Sometimes you ask them not to. Very difficult to do. You have your yellow, and you go up to the blue, and you choose whether you go into the blue, and then you find you make green, which is very exciting.
That's lovely, isn't it? Right, everyone just put their hands up now, no more talking, because some people haven't finished their work.
These children have plenty of other opportunity to paint and draw pictures during their year in Class 1. But here, seeds are being sown to simply observe and experience. The ability to be open to phenomena, to allow the world to speak to us before we jump in to analyse, will be called upon later when, for example, they begin to study science.
I wouldn't, not if it's still rather wet. But it's very beautiful.
Okay, if I was to do... Let's see now. This pattern. Who could do the other side, I wonder? Right, Freya. See if you can do the other side. Do you the tray?
Form drawing in Class 2 is one of the ways that children are helped with their sense of symmetry and coordination, a task that is increasingly valued in education generally, particularly to counteract a growing tendency to dyslexia among the young.
Okay, is that okay?
Was habe ich heute in meinem blauen Sack? Was ist das? Eine Flöte. Kann man darauf spielen? Ja, ganz sicher. Kann man darauf richtig? Könnt ihr alle auf der Flöte spielen? Ja? Könnt ihr das spielen? Ja? Ihr könnt auf der Flöte spielen. Eine schöne, lange Holzflöte. Eine Flöte. Und was habe ich noch in meinem Sack? Ah, das ist bestimmt auch eine Flöte. Das ist bestimmt eine Flöte, ja? Nein! Was ist das? Ein Baum, ganz richtig. Ein Tannenbaum. Ist das auch ein Tannenbaum? Nein! Nein. Was ist das denn? Das ist ein Teller, Primrose, ganz richtig. Ein runder, gelber Teller. Sehr schön. Und das ist doch sicher auch ein Teller, ja? Nein! Das ist ein Tannenbaum, ja? Nein! Ist das eine Flöte? Nein! Aber das ist vielleicht ein gelber Teller, ja? Nein! Oder kann das vielleicht ein Auto sein? Nein! Auch nicht! Ein Flugzeug. Ein Flugzeug, das kann ganz toll schnell in der Luft fliegen. Ganz richtig.
So, now what did Goliath say to the Hebrews?
Stories from the Old Testament are the subject of the current main lesson for these 8- and 9-year-olds in Class 3 at the King's Langley Rudolf Steiner School.
So they were going to have two
Earlier in the year, they've learnt about weights and measures, as well as a 4-week main lesson on farming. It's a time, the teachers feel, for coming to grips with the world, of tackling the nuts and bolts of life, but still learning through doing. Their building main lesson is still to come.
They will learn the process of having to get permission to build what it is we want to build, choosing the best site, clearing the site, digging the foundations, mixing the cement, laying perhaps 1 or 2 bricks, and part of our building is going to be a little bit of maintenance, because with my last class we built that little Wendy house in the kindergarten, and the roof, the tiles are falling off, and so we have got to repair the roof. We're going to take off the old tiles and put on some roofing felt, because maintenance, that means keeping up buildings, is just as much a part of building as building a new one.
Do you know who built this house?
All the big children.
That's right. Class 3. And they built it 10 years ago. Good, isn't it?
Yeah, the tiles are starting to fall off though.
The tiles?
Yeah.
Yes, I think they're going to mend it. It's a nice, snuggy house.
It's not very big though. No.
You'd like a bigger one, would you?
Yes. With curtains.
With
And
curtains?
A door.
And a door.
And windows.
Yeah.
You can open and shut. Not like this big one. And shutters. Just a normal house like the ones we have.
Is that what you'd like?
Yeah.
What else would you like?
Beds.
What?
Beds. Beds.
In gymnastics, there is more to these exercises than just exercise. The children are being challenged to keep to a rhythm, in spite of what's going on in an increasingly unstructured world at large. It's similar to the discipline of singing in rounds.
Keep it up. Great, well done.
This is a story I would like you to have in your books, to draw a picture of the story. There's a rough outline to start you off, the 3 standing stones, the hill, the poppies. That's important, isn't it? You could also...
Helen Weatherhead teaches religion as well as being a class teacher. She's just told, not read, a story to Class 4. Now they will each draw a picture inspired by what they've heard.
One child will choose one element, another will choose a different part. It depends what speaks strongly to them. And then afterwards, they have all their religion lessons in their drawing book. And they can look back and look at the pictures and say, oh, that story was about such and such. One of the basic principles in religious teaching in the school is really to foster in the children a mood of reverence and respect for all living things, for the whole earth. We work, of course, a lot through the seasons and the great religious festivals. The story this morning is a Spanish folktale, but nevertheless is connected with the festivals of Easter and Pentecost. Through it there runs a theme of resurrection and transformation, how loyalty and love can transform people. And with the younger children, these themes, told in this sort of way, work very deeply into their imaginations, and they carry that with them.
Helen Weatherhead originally taught in a state secondary and then primary school. She became a Waldorf teacher through being drawn to the education for her own children. I asked her what it was that had first attracted her.
I think it was initially the way the curriculum complemented so well the development of the children, how carefully it had been thought out, that there was nothing done that hadn't been thought about. There was nothing haphazard about the curriculum, about what was brought to the children. It was just right for the age of the child, what was being taught. Also, the feeling that not just their academic needs were being catered for, but they were being looked at as whole individuals, physically, spiritually, in every sort of way. And that was very important.
Good thing you're here, Arthur. You've come to meet your trouble.
Now, what did we say about shaking hands?
You're not.
Yeah, it wouldn't be like that then.
Yeah.
How would you do it?
Just hold his hands or pat him
More
on
like
the
that.
shoulder.
Yes.
Helen is a class teacher for Class 8. It's the children's last year with her before they go on into the upper school at around the age of 15. The Waldorf curriculum will continue alongside their exam work, but the pupils will then be taught entirely by specialist teachers. A class teacher will usually start again with a new Class 1.
The commitment for a class teacher is ideally 8 years. And I don't think any class teacher begins in Class 1 without that ideal, that they will carry on for 8 years. Of course, life circumstances sometimes prevents that, but that is the ideal, that you will grow and develop and go along with the children for 8 years, teaching them. The enormous bonus for the children is the security that they have and the continuity they have. They don't have to start again each year with a new teacher. They have the same teacher year after year. They get to know the teacher, they get to know who you are, your mannerisms, everything about you. You also, in the same way, get to know the children, and there's that social bonding over the years, which makes for something very special. More towards her as you do that. OK, off you go. Give them the cue then.
That's a tremendous challenge for you.
Yes, but it's very exciting because you never repeat anything. You have the continuity of relationships, and of course that's always changing because nothing stays the same. But nevertheless, you have the challenge of a different curriculum each year. And as it's a challenge and an adventure for the children, it's that for the teacher too.
What happens if a child doesn't get on with their teacher?
Now, this is often asked. It happens very rarely. It really happens very rarely. And it's not very often that it's something that can't be overcome, because children are not obliged to like their teachers, but it's an absolute obligation on the part of a teacher to get on with the children, to find a way through whatever difficulty comes. And if you have the will to work on yourself and on the relationship and to bring it to colleagues and be prepared to be supported by colleagues and to take advice, you can find a way through. You really can. Because there's something very special about every child. It sometimes takes longer to find it. It sometimes takes a long time to make that relationship. But if you believe that it can happen, it will do.
Work very carefully outside the line. You manage that? Remember, it's pulling towards you. You don't. It's not a push movement, it's a pull.
Craft work is an important element in the Waldorf curriculum throughout the school years. In woodwork, children start by making a mallet or an egg out of a solid piece of wood.
It's a bit like sculpture, really. You're actually releasing what is in the chunk of wood and experiencing all the qualities of the wood which is actually in the timber itself.
Some of these 12-year-olds in Class 6 have now moved on to a spoon.
And then we go on to bowls, which is really a progression from the spoon.
Yes.
Because a spoon, without a handle, obviously. And then we go on to, well, these bowls that we do are shaped. This one here has just been finished and oiled. So they're developing the skills of using the gouge and all the carving techniques, saws. And then Class 7, we work on mechanical toys, of things that, moving toys that work. So we have here one lad's made a parrot, which does somersaults. And then we have, here we have an owl. And here we have an eagle. And there we have a very fiery dragon. Yes, please go. Go to your next lesson. Whose work is this? Philip, can you put it away, please? And no, don't leave the saw hanging in the work. As you move it out, take it backwards and forwards. No. Gentle. If it doesn't move gently, then you're doing something wrong. Yes, there we are. And put your work back into the other room. I try and couple it with the mechanics science main lesson that they have in Class 7, so that they have an experience of actually making something that they're learning. Not necessarily directly at all, but has a sort of principle. and yet we don't just discuss it. It's just a question of doing it and experiencing it. So there's no emphasis on how or why. It's just so that they can experience it, and then they ask quite often how it does work, and then we go into that. But I leave it up to them to really ask the questions. Here we have one which is quite an interesting one, even for adults to grasp how that really works. This is an acrobat. Can't fall off, you see. That takes us to class 8, and then we start on the first beginnings of furniture making. We make a stool, and I've got one over here to show you. This is one unfinished stool, and I try and encourage that they do some sort of form or pattern on the surface. They don't have to, but it's just nice when they really get involved in their own original designs. And this works very well because basically the legs that come through and wedged are forming part of the pattern, and he's worked that in very clearly with this form that he's got there. So then from the stools, which is the beginnings of joinery, we move on to more sophisticated joining techniques, which is really the box, which is a very fundamental form to be able to achieve, the box that contains things. And this boy here has done a dovetail joint all the way around with a brass pin which goes through each end. And this is for his pencils. And then that can be substituted with these sort of joints, which is the comb or finger joint, which is a bit more straightforward. They're square to themselves. This is one project I did for class 12, who hadn't done woodwork since class 9. So this is a little bit more sophisticated.
It was an 18-year-old girl who made the musical box. In metalwork, she and her classmates would, in their various tasks in the upper school, have recapitulated the whole evolution of man's working relationship with the metals, from the Bronze Age through to iron and on into the Industrial Revolution. Likewise, in mathematics, the tables are thoroughly learned and absorbed before calculators come into use. In all subjects, there's no bypassing the basics, the grammar of each particular discipline. What do you make?
An apron for Mr. Gordon.
For who?
For Mr. Gordon, the woodwork teacher.
Was that your idea?
No.
His idea?
Mrs. Lawrence's, because I finished what I was making, so I have to do this till I can find something to do.
What did you make before?
It was a zip-up jumper with a hood, big blue one.
Was that for yourself?
Yeah, that one's at home now.
What does your mum think about boys doing handwork?
She likes it because she's the teacher.
Further, carry on about a centimetre beyond, and then you get a metre corner. That's it. Stop. Okay.
Is it the first time you've worked on a machine?
No, it's not. I made a sweatshirt before, and I made a waistcoat.
Oh, really? All this year?
Well, I made it once before I came to the school, the waistcoat, and I made the sweatshirt here.
How long have you been at the school?
About 2 years.
Where did you go to school before?
In America.
Oh, really?
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. Was it a Steiner school?
Yeah, it was.
Was it very different to here?
A few of the lessons are different. I didn't have woodwork.
Which lessons do you like best?
I like candles.
Do you?
Yeah.
What else?
I like main lesson and gym.
What have you been doing in main lesson this term?
been doing chemistry. We've done... Well, we haven't been doing a lot because we've been doing a play at the moment.
Yes.
So,
What did you think of chemistry?
It was interesting.
Is it?
Yeah, quite interesting. It's not very interesting, but it's
Quite
yeah.
interesting. Have you done handwork all through the school then?
Yeah, but we started with a different teacher and we just used to knit. We never used the machines. We started using the machines about a year ago.
How old are you?
13.
13. What about boys doing handwork then?
Well, personally, I don't enjoy it.
Don't you?
No.
You're doing all right.
I know. I'd rather do something else.
I asked Heather Thomas, the teacher of Class 7, back from their handwork lesson, to show me some of the children's main lesson books.
We actually learnt constructing the different, whether it was a pentagon. This pentagram is quite a difficult construction, and I gave them for homework, actually, the instructions just on paper, and they had to work it out at home. It's quite a hard one, a pentagram. This pattern here is actually the basis for the compass pattern. If you turn over, Julian, have you got the compass pattern here? Yes, you see, it comes then eventually into the compass pattern, which then has a real practical application.
Yes.
For mariners, or for anybody now, of course.
What have you enjoyed most, Julian, over the year?
Well, I like geometry, that's why I wanted to show it, because I just like colouring and stuff. So.
Yeah. In your ordinary books, then, leave your old books out, please.
This is a lovely book.
Yes, it's some lovely books. This is Imogen's book.
Now, this is a main lesson book.
Yes, this is a main lesson book from the beginning of the year. And we started the year, you see, as we go through, I glue them together so that they have actually about 3 or 4, sometimes 5 books at the end of the year. And then they do a painting, and on it they write Class 7 yearbook and then their names. Then we put a binding on, so they've got the whole year's work in one
Can we look at it?
volume. Yes. So we started off with history of Tudor times.
So this is like their textbook,
This
really,
is like
but they
their
make...
own textbook, which they've made,
Yes.
really, with my help, of
Yes.
course, because there are certain things that I want them to have that they can't write on their own. And a lot of their free creative writing they've actually done at home
Yes.
in their other books.
Yes. So the art really gets interwoven with history or any other subject,
Yes, it
doesn't
goes right throughout the whole book, really, throughout the whole of the main lessons, whether it's chemistry or history or, of course, geometry. There's a lot of art in geometry. In the lower school, you see, you can actually have time to make the books look really beautiful.
Yes.
In the upper school, of course, it's much more academic work and not nearly so much time left for making things lovely. And then we came on to astronomy, which is also in Class 7. And we had a look to see, to try to think and remember how the stars move if we actually look at them and go out perhaps half an hour later, which way they actually move. So we did Facing the Stars. The Midnight Sun, we spoke about the Midnight Sun. And the world according to Ptolemy, of course.
Imogen, which lessons did you enjoy most?
Astronomy is nice.
Astronomy, did you?
It's
Yes.
wonderful.
It's nice.
Okay, so what have we got here?
We've got, this is Mary's book. This is Mary Harrington's book. This is her own design, really, because they usually do their own design of various things. This is the Court of the Star Chamber, which played a major role, really, in those times. Printing press.
Yeah.
Gunpowder, that, of course, was a
an adventure which changed the world radically, discovering new worlds.
Yeah.
Henry VIII, of course, and the Great Bible.
Do you feel that by drawing pictures as well, it makes the history become more alive for them?
I think it does.
Gosh, this is
yes,
wonderful.
it's a wonderful page, isn't it? You can see, I mean, by the title, what that is actually.
Yeah.
So, your favourite one, is it, Mary? This is Leonardo, Mary's portrait of Leonardo. It's quite a good one. Nutrition.
Oh, you did nutrition as
Yes,
well,
we've done health and hygiene. It was a
Do
short...
they do cooking, this class?
No, we do cooking next year. And this was the grace, because every day we say a grace before our meals, before snack in the
Yeah.
morning and before lunch. And we can say it in about 9 or 10 languages now. We do Greek and Latin, Swedish, Norwegian, all sorts of things. This is rather nice too. This is chemistry.
Science, yes.
That's a lovely one. Bunsen burner.
Yep. And they did all these experiments.
We did all these experiments together,
Yes.
yes. Most of them in here and some of them in the lab.
Having looked at these main lesson books and bearing in mind that classes are unstreamed and that the school is open to children of all abilities, I went back to Helen Weatherhead to ask her about concerns that are sometimes expressed about Waldorf education. For example, the not learning to read or write at an early age.
It's not a case, as we see it, of teaching them later, but teaching at a time that is appropriate, actually, for them.
And that applies with not just reading and writing then, but with many areas of learning, doesn't it?
It does with many areas of learning, and of course it's not necessarily that things will be taught later. Sometimes some things, in comparison with other schools, are brought earlier. And you can take an example of perhaps fractions, and when that is brought, we wouldn't bring that until after the age of 9. Now, in some other places that would come later, but we bring it then for a reason.
What reason?
Well, around the age of 9, there's a crisis time for children, because all of a sudden, up till the age of 9, really, they've been in the centre of their world. Everything has been around about them, and they have been right in the centre. And now they're waking up within themselves. And somehow they're withdrawing, and they're outside now, looking on, and it can be a very worrying time for children. But also, it then can be the right time for teaching parts rather than the whole. Up till that age, everything has been the whole to the parts, because life has been like that for the child. But after that age, you can move on. And fractions, of course, the breaking down of the whole into parts, is an ideal thing to bring at that age.
What about the teaching of history?
History, wonderfully, really the curriculum parallels the consciousness of the child as the child grows. If I can give you an example of the 13, 14-year-old in Class 8, they're really at an age of transition. In our schools, they're going into the upper school. They're coming to the end of the second 7-year phase. And it's a time when they're really looking forward. It's a time of adventure because they want to be grown up, they want to go on, they want to learn, but they're also aware that they're leaving their childhood behind, that perhaps they're losing something, and there's a sense of loss as well as exhilaration at what lies ahead. They know it's a time of change, it's a time of great unrest for them within themselves. Their feelings are very intense, so they can very well understand the feelings of the people who went through the tremendous changes of the 18th and 19th centuries. When you think of how the world was never the same again in Britain after the Industrial Revolution, the American War of Independence, the French Revolution, these tremendous struggles for equality and liberty that these people went through, and how they suffered, and how they knew that things would never be the same again. And it's almost a reflection of what is going on inside the children at that time. And so it speaks very powerfully to them.
I then asked Helen about the lack of emphasis on competition in Steiner schools and the virtual absence of marks and school exams, even though the children do go on, slightly later than others, to take their GCSEs and A-level examinations.
Although we don't have formal exams, that doesn't mean that we don't have a test to check that the children have learnt things. They need to know for themselves how they're getting on. So if you like, it's not that competition is eliminated, but it's competition with yourself. Can you improve on what you did before? Can you measure up to what you expect of yourself? Also, I think somehow competition disappears with this community that is created by the class over the years. Because the social bonding is so strong, the children all know their strengths and weaknesses. They know their own, they know that of their classmates, and so they don't need to compete with each other. They actually come to appreciate one another for themselves.
Some people would say that children will only work if they have that kind of incentive. I mean, that's not your experience then?
Well, I would be silly to say that if I didn't say we were going to have a test, it doesn't focus the concentration. Of course it does. But nevertheless, children learn when they're motivated from within themselves. And for me to say we're going to have a test is imposing something on them, really. But when the motivation comes from themselves, then they really do work.
Every class has singing once or twice a week, even in the upper school. Anne Eyre is the teacher. Her pupils here are 15 and 16-year-olds in Class 9.
Open wide. Open up. Now let's do it in 4 parts. Sopranos, followed by tenors. Perhaps William and Oliver will be the tenors today. Then altos, then bass. Now this might catch you out. Ready and... Soprano start. 1, 2. Tenors. Altos. I'm very happy teaching music here because it's an environment where music matters. It's encouraged. It's an integral part of the whole day for everybody. Everybody sings, and for me that's the heart of the matter. The whole education is a musical one, an artistic one.
Go on another 10 metres and find another point that's at the same level, and read its position, which will be slightly different.
Steiner schools have a reputation for encouraging the arts, but the idea is that every subject is taught artistically, that is, creatively and imaginatively, even weighing and measuring, in this case, surveying in Class 11.
Which will enable you to join up the curve. Also, please, since this is all going to be coloured afterwards, be careful not to make the lines so heavy. Sorry, I don't mean to. See, some people have already got that going straight up the bank. Well, there's no way it could have done that. You get the idea?
Yeah.
You haven't got any of that yet, but you've got the data for that, haven't you?
Upper school physics is another subject taught by Nicholas Wrigley. He himself was at a Steiner school, and I asked him if he could tell me what characterised the teaching of science in a Steiner school.
I can try, it's very difficult. Here, this is Class 10. They are at the end of their first year of GCSE, one more year to come. They take the exams at the end of Class 11. And nowadays in GCSE, coursework is a major element in many exams, including physics. And I, for one, like that, with Waldorf teaching as the background, because it gives this opportunity to do lots of experimental work. In particular, it gives the opportunity to observe keenly and accurately as to what's going on. I mean, here's an example. There are several around the room. However, the business of observing carefully is something that we've really done much more of in the lower schools, starting in Class 6, then Class 7, Class 8, Class 9. Observation as accurately as possible has been the accent, not so much interpretation. You can't really begin to do that usefully until you're certain of what you've seen or done, you see. And this, in many ways, is a culmination of that whole process. If it works in the sense that they do see what's wrong and what they can do about it, and notice when something unexpected happens, that's how science is built up. This is, to my mind, education as opposed to training. That's the difference, I think. I'm not suggesting many in other schools don't have the same approach, but it's very much the underlying intention here.
Have you paid proper heed to the safety report?
The reason that I particularly like this coursework involved in GCSE is that it's an opportunity to really bring all this observation that we've stressed hitherto to some kind of a development in which the dimension of interpretation is added. That actually brings the thing full circle, and that's science. At least that's my understanding of science. Adding interpretation to the observation and then drawing conclusions.
Dum, 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 dum. Pick it up. Dum, dum. Keep it going. Dum, dum, dum. Give it a bit of a rhythm, please. Dum. Altos. La, la, la. With my diamond plate.
Got it in my hand.
Got it in my hand.
Gonna do out the light bulbs that are in this land. It's Long John. He's long gone. Like a turkey through the corn. Oh, big-eyed John.
Oh, big-eyed John.
He's gone, gone.
He's gone, gone.
He's gone, 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 Long John.
Ready, and... Eurythmy, like the singing and craft work, continues throughout the school years in a Waldorf school.
This particular exercise has to do with a combination of the individual coordination to actually throw the rod back and forth to themselves, step in rhythm, and then have to have the social dynamic of actually being able to maintain their part in the group.
Let's try again, Try again, right? Okay, you got to remember, even though you've thrown it one time, you carry on with the same throwing pattern, you just have to make yourself step the other way.
There's lots of kinds of movement in the world, and what we're looking to do is broaden the whole spectrum of their experience by having this very prescribed type of movement, which has a real uprightness as well as the qualities of grace involved in their regular school life. It's just something else that they take forward with them as part of the educational basis.
One of the 3-week main lessons in Class 12 is on the history of 20th century art. Some of these pupils are also taking A-level art.
I did this picture on silk because it has gives a very translucent colour. And I wanted to bring out all the colours of the birds and the background and everything. And I found the silver also made it shine.
Yes, it's lovely. Fine. And the other pictures?
Well, that picture I got ideas from Matisse and Kandinsky. The shapes of the trees and the figures in the background were Matisse, and the style of the colours, Kandinsky. And I got some pictures similar to that.
Because Kandinsky's been your project, hasn't
it? Yes,
my
personal study.
Yes.
And
let's have a look at that.
Well, this is the style that first brought me to Kandinsky. It's a fairy tale.
Yes.
And then I became interested in this kind of style. And it's that sort of colour which I based that picture on.
Yes, I see.
Originally I was going to do the project more realistically, and I started by doing that picture. But then I found it was a bit dry and I wanted to be much brighter and things.
Are you going to art school or
No, I'm not.
What are you going to do?
I want to go to university.
Do you?
Mm.
How long have you been in the school?
I came when I was 3.5. Came in the playgroup, so it's 14.5 years.
What do you want to read at university then?
I think zoology.
Yes.
I'm doing that as an A-level.
Yes.
And I enjoy it very much.
So you're doing A-level zoology, art?
Chemistry and English literature.
Wow, yeah.
But I've done art this year and I'm taking the other 3 next year.
Yes, I see.
Because I couldn't do it all at once.
Yes. Because you take exams a little bit later in this school, don't you, than other schools?
Yes, the GCSEs are 1 year later, and so, of course, the A-levels are as well.
Do you mind that?
No, not really. I mean, everything is slightly later in the school. You learn to read later. And to begin with, it makes you very self-conscious when you're around other children. But as you grow older, you find that it doesn't make any difference anyway.
You learn in the end. Yes.
And if you do your exams later, you're a bit older and you can make a better decision, I think.
In Slovenia, with the European Forum, that's been explored further. So I thought you might like to hear what's going on there, because it is actually very interesting.
Rudolf Steiner schools have no head teacher. The College of Teachers meet together every week to make policy decisions and to consult with one another.
Croatia, I think I'd like to start with, because
here an upper school humanities teacher, Chris Clowder, is reporting on a recent visit to Eastern Europe and Russia and the sudden flowering of Waldorf schools there.
The biggest initiative is in Moscow itself, but the interest goes right across, right into Siberia, and also at St. Petersburg. There are 3 initiative groups there, and one of the small pre-Waldorf kindergartens has 100 children. And again, they're hoping to start this September. But again, they're looking for assistance very much from the West in know-how, in support, in material help to actually get started. Czechoslovakia, they'll be starting in Prague this September. The teacher training has already begun there. They'll be starting with Class 1.
I asked Chris Clowder after the meeting how on earth a school can function with no head teacher, without a hierarchy.
We run on a collegial principle. Teaching is a matter of self-education. Teachers have to learn as well as their pupils. And to help them develop and become better teachers, they need their colleagues. And they learn from their colleagues of their weaknesses and their strengths, which means the responsibilities within a school are shared out, and people take responsibilities for certain amounts of time. But we meet as a group once a week, and all policy decisions concerning the school are made as a group, with no voting, because there's no law that says majorities are right and minorities are wrong. Very often the minority can be right. Where we learn, just as we're teaching the children, to understand each other's abilities and how we can help each other's abilities come to the fore in the running of the school. Sounds idealistic and utopian, but it does work. There are 550 schools that actually practice this.
Michael Hall School in Sussex, where our journey began. It's midsummer. The Midsummer Festival, the Festival of St. John. In all Waldorf schools, great importance is attached to celebration of the festivals. It's connected with their emphasis on rhythm in the life of the growing child, the rhythm of the day, the week, the year. Teachers also feel that such events help the children to keep a sensitive connection with the earth, the seasons, and with the mighty themes of death and rebirth that run through all the great religious traditions. The theme of this year's pageant at Michael Hall, performed by classes 1 to 8, is the story of the evolution of our relationship to our home, the earth. One class teacher, whose pupils are taking part in the pageant, is Peter Bark.
And in a way, the festivals remind us that there is a task for human beings on earth. If we don't recognize our path, our destiny, then things can go very wrong. And it's just one other way in our education of reaching the children in an artistic and perfectly open and natural way to connect them to the world, to the earth.
The Midsummer Festival is also an occasion to celebrate the year's work. Looking at the exhibition, I remembered some words that Helen Weatherhead at King's Langley had said to me about the aims of Waldorf education.
I think what we are trying to do is to give the children the confidence to recognise their own individuality, to become individuals in their own right. Of course they have to have information, knowledge has to be imparted to them, they have to learn to think, and then they can stand in the world as individuals. But along with that, you also have to educate the head through the heart and educate their feelings. Because if you can do that, then you can transcend your own opinion and your own ideas. And you can sympathise with other people, you can understand. Even if you don't agree, you can understand other people's ideas. And somehow, this individuality plus social forces and social feelings that are educated together is what builds community. And that is what a classroom is, that is what a class of mixed ability children, because that is what we have, is. It's like a microcosm of society. And I can't think really of a better preparation for life than that.
Do you remember, was that a bus there? Were you there? No.
David Martin has been at Steiner School since kindergarten, in France, America and Britain. He's in class 12 and will, this evening, take part in a school-leaving ceremony. I asked him what he thought was the most common misconception about Waldorf education.
Well, when I've been traveling, sometimes I've met people and I say I come from a Waldorf school. And they say, oh, that's the place where they don't do exams. And so then they're often surprised if I do tell them that I'm doing maths, physics, chemistry, and French.
You must take your chance and swear before you choose. If you choose wrong, never to speak to Lady...
David and his class are performing the annual Shakespeare play as a parting gift to the school. And before the end of term, having done fundraising to ensure that everyone can go, they will travel on an art tour to Italy as a climax to their education.
Certainly, my conscience will serve me to run from this Jew, my master. The fiend is at mine elbow and tempts me, saying to me, Gobbo, Lancelot Gobbo.
And after the play, David, together with the whole of Class 12, begins a torchlit journey across the familiar landscape of his childhood to light the St. John's fire.
In a way, I think that's what this education has been trying to do. It's been trying to give us light in the form of knowledge so that we are able to see what really is happening around us and not just what the media and public opinion is trying to enforce on us, and be free within the world and act out of our own choice. It's each one bringing his own fire in a way, each one bringing his own personality into a group, and from that making a whole, which is the fire, which is much stronger than any one could have. Because it works together. All the torches contribute to that. And that has been the essence in the production of our play, for example. We have had to all make an effort together and forget our differences to produce this Class 12 play. And we've had to do it again in fundraising. And I think we'll have to do it again in our lives with other people.
ducks went swimming one day over the hills and far away. Quack, quack, quack. Three little ducks went swimming back. Three little ducks went swimming one day over the hills and far away. Mother duck said quack, quack, quack. Two little ducks came swimming back. Two little ducks went swimming one day over the hills and far away. Mother duck said quack, quack, quack. One little duck came swimming back. One little duck went swimming one day over the hills and far away.